Right. Well, very good morning, everyone. I am Reto Malacrida from the WTO Secretariat. I'm the head of the Government Procurement and Competition Policy Group. And I want to begin by thanking my EBRD colleagues for the opportunity to make a brief appearance on behalf of the WTO Secretariat and to say a few words of welcome. I am very glad to do so. This opening session is really a joint venture, as I am sharing the podium, as you can see, with Director Michel Nussbaumer from the EBRD. I will keep my remarks brief, so the two of us do not go over the same ground. As most of you may know, this week, the WTO Government Procurement Committee is holding meetings. And this is why most of us from the Secretariat side are very busy right now, and frankly, maybe you can see it, lacking sleep. I hope you will excuse me for not staying on this morning, because we have to attend to our parties and the chair of the committee. However, I've asked my colleague Lozindaba to sit in this morning and take some notes for us in the Secretariat so that we may also benefit from your interesting contributions, and we very much look forward to those. The first thing I want to do is to thank the EBRD for organizing this technical workshop. We from the WTO Secretariat are pleased that you organize these kinds of workshops. They add value for the participants in our committee meeting, and they help to build capacity. Let me move to the topic chosen for today: how to make green procurement more effective by leveraging international trade. This topic is one which we from the WTO Secretariat have engaged repeatedly. We feel quite strongly that international trade is part of the answer to the problem of climate change. Indeed, you do not have to take it from me. Our top-level official, WTO Director General Okonjo Iweala, said that, and I quote, we cannot get to net zero without trade, because it is indispensable for spreading low-carbon technology to everywhere it is needed, end of quote. Personally, I have talked about the role of government procurement over and over. In my view, internationally open green procurement supports sustainable development goals. It facilitates economies moving to more environmentally sustainable consumption patterns by giving them access to higher quality or lower priced climate-friendly products and technologies. And by keeping our borders open and allowing international suppliers to access domestic green procurement opportunities, we help these suppliers to accelerate their transition to more environmentally sustainable production patterns. Now, I think either Michelle or Dorina, if and when she joins us, will introduce the illustrious speakers that you have the benefit of hearing from today. So I will only say that our participants today are very fortunate to hear from such great experts. I wish I could stay and benefit myself. Before I give back the floor to Michelle, let me just add one final point. We from the Secretariat feel that the GPA 2012, the WTO's Government Procurement Agreement, is an incredibly useful tool that helps countries, and this includes developing economies, ensure that their government procurement systems are based on international competition, transparency, and integrity. We would be very glad to hear from you and assist you if you have questions about the GPA 2012 and accession to it. Indeed, I'm pleased to say that we run an active GPA-related technical assistance program. And in that context, we often work together and with great pleasure with our EBRD colleagues. So please feel free to reach out to us anytime. This concludes my welcome remarks. I wish everyone a productive technical workshop. Thank you very much. Michel, let me return the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Reto. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, those present in the room and those online. My name is Michel Nussbaumer. I am the director of the Legal Transition Program at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of our bank to this technical workshop that is delivered here at the WTO headquarters in Geneva as part of our collaboration with the GPA Secretariat. And I would like to reciprocate and thank Reto and his colleagues for hosting us for this workshop. We really appreciate your hospitality and the collaboration. It's always a great pleasure for me to come to Geneva. This is the city where I qualified as a lawyer back in 1988, and I practiced law in the 1990s. I am now based in London at the headquarters of EBRD, but this collaboration with the WTO gives me opportunities to come back to Geneva many times, and this is fantastic. As you probably know, the EBRD is an international financial institution based in London with the mission to promote transition to market economies in its countries of operations. It was established in 1991 after the fall of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe. The bank is primarily an investor. It injects money into the private sector of all these countries to boost the economy. But at the same time, our bank is also a policy advisor. And in particular, our legal transition program, which I am in charge of, focuses on developing legal rules for a transparent and predictable investment climate in our countries of operations. At EBRD, we strongly believe that the GPA 2012 enhances transparency, good governance, and environmental protection, and provides incentives for governments to engage in open and competitive government procurement internationally. The bank highly values expanding GPA membership to transition economies, and in 2014, we have established a permanent collaboration framework with the GPA Secretariat through the EBRD GPA Technical Cooperation Facility. Sorry, it's a long name. And the objective is to promote among the EBRD countries of operations accession to the GPA. The facility offers technical assistance to governments in three ways. First, addressing regulatory issues related to the GPA accession, including compliance assessments of domestic procurement regimes against the GPA standards. Second, advising on the preparation, negotiation, and submission of market access offers acceptable to the GPA parties. And third, supporting government delegations during the GPA negotiations in Geneva. We have assisted Montenegro, Moldova, Ukraine, and most recently North Macedonia to become GPA parties, and we are delighted to see a steady expansion of the GPA membership. Currently, our facility is assisting Albania, and we are also looking forward to working with the governments of Georgia, Jordan, and Tajikistan once GPA negotiations are reopened. And also, we would love to support other Western Balkan countries in their initial steps towards the GPA accession. At EBRD, we recognize the economic and social impact of government procurement on domestic, regional, and global economies. With the global market for government procurement estimated at 13 trillion, it's trillion US dollars per annum, or on average 14% of GDP in OECD countries, the impact of public procurement policies on sustainable development is just enormous. With current global threat from climate change, it is particularly vital to understand how the GPA 2012 may foster sustainable economic growth among WTO members. Sustainability is at the heart of the EBRD mission, and the bank has positioned itself at the forefront of climate and environmental action among international financial institutions. Since the launch of the Green Economy Transition Initiative in 2015, and despite the challenges posed by the pandemic in 2020, the bank has committed to devoting more than 50% of its annual investments to the green economy by 2025. And in fact, the target was already reached in 2021 and again in 22 and 23. This strategy underscores our role as a green transition bank, scaling up efforts to support a low carbon and resilient future. As a matter of fact, the EBRD implements its mandate in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. The EBRD investment and technical cooperation focus on developing a green economy and accelerating digital transition, thus facilitating the achievement of a net zero business strategy in the private sector and fostering modern, open, market-oriented and sustainable economies in our countries of operations. The development of new strategic sustainable procurement policies has a critical significance for achieving net zero goals globally. Today, we would like to use the opportunity to bring the EBRD green transition expertise, as well as innovative public procurement research of the SAPIENS network, to explore together with the GPA Secretariat and the ITC, the International Trade Center, how sustainability-oriented cross-border government procurement may empower green transition of economies. In terms of introduction, SAPIENS Network is an acronym, and it stands for Sustainability and Procurement in International, European, and National Systems. It is an academic research project and training network integrating sustainability research into public procurement studies. It was funded by the European Union and is promoted by 10 European universities leading in sustainability research. And as such, the SAPIENS network fosters research in strategic use of public procurement policies to address the social, economic, and environmental challenges faced by the governments in the 21st century. So as we at EBRD are dedicated to promoting green transition, you will not be surprised to hear that our bank is among the SAPIENS network partner organizations. We believe it's imperative that we continue to leverage government procurement policies as a strategic tool to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. This technical workshop aims to equip you with the knowledge and tools needed to drive sustainable procurement practices across borders, contributing to our shared goals of a greener future. I hope today's discussion will highlight the transformative potential of green procurement, its impact on green investment, and how the GPA 2012 serves as a model for achieving best value while meeting international trade obligations. I wish you all a very productive workshop and engaging discussions. Thank you. Now we are missing our moderator. Unfortunately, Dorina Gitaru has been held at the, she missed a flight in Vienna on her way from Moldova. So I suppose, Elisa, you are there, right? Elisa, maybe you want to say a few words to introduce the next session where you are a speaker together with Judge Mark Steiner from Switzerland. Elisa, do you want to open the session?
Hello, good morning. I hope that technology works.
We cannot hear you. It's very weak.
You need to use the...
Oh, sorry. We can hear you. Okay, I need to use the headphones.
Very good. I'm happy to hear that technology does work as opposite to the airlines today. Let me welcome you to the first session, which is essentially about tools public procurement has for green procurement. And in this session, we will try to set the baseline of what is available today to governments regarding green procurement and what tools are specifically tailored for the interaction with the international trade, as well as to highlight practical cases of how the government level approach to procurement is working. So in this session, we have a couple of speakers, but to specify what we are after, what we would like to start with, it is a question of how the procurement can deliver for governments a green investment. So this is the topic that I am starting for you today, and assuming that the PowerPoint would work, we would like to start from looking at how the investment can benefit from the green procurement and explore whether the governments are able to use the green procurement strategically today. And I have a job here to set the floor for this exploration. And I promise you that what I am presenting here is coming from the research that we have completed in 23, so it's pretty fresh. And this research has been investigating essentially whether the public procurement is green today. What we know on a policy level, it is that infrastructure has to be green, and achieving green procurement and sustainable supply chain is essential for the governments worldwide. What governments has a challenge with this, it is that they have to deliver the climate change agenda, making sure that they are supporting sustainable growth in their domestic economies and in their regional economic frameworks. So in terms of how to do it, the recipe is pretty simple. You have to have a new policy, you have to have digital tools preferably, and you have to strategically use the procurement to make it work for the entire public sector in your country. And this is where we are coming to the current status and looking at how governments promote green procurement. Today, the countries of transition economies that we have looked at, they are only starting their way towards green infrastructure and using green procurement to strengthen this agenda. But what has come up as a very positive note in this, that while the governments may not be up to speed on a market or economy level, local governments, municipalities, they are much better at tailoring sustainability principles and to the challenges of the local communities. So what we would like to pull out for you to look at, it is how municipalities are adopting sustainability benchmarks for their procurement and how they use it to manage infrastructure investment. But starting from the very beginning, the question is, do we have a clear sustainable procurement standard that would be reflected in a regulatory framework? And we actually have 3 of them. Most recognized one is perhaps United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and commonly known as SDGs. They have Goal 12, which is discussing the need for ensuring sustainable consumption and production, and target 12.7 under this goal is about promoting public procurement practices that are sustainable, and this is to be done in accordance with the national legislation, policies, and priorities. So this is quite wide phrased objective and target. And for this target, the governments, they have an indicator, and this indicator is discussing the question of implementing the policy and implementing the action plan. So let's agree that this is actually not a very ambitious target. From the market perspective, this sustainable procurement standard coming from SDGs is being supplemented by ISO. So ISO 20400-2017 has been formulated to propose a sustainable procurement standard for market, for suppliers, service providers, and contractors. But this is a guidance, not a certifiable standard, so soft law. And development of this standard from 2017 is moving from a guidance to offering suppliers and market in principle a self-assessment to find out how they stand against sustainability objectives in the country. And finally, there is a procurement-specific SIPS sustainability model, which has an objective to measure, to target, and improve sustainability of supply chain for public sector client. And again, this is a model, this is not a standard. So if we would look at regulatory framework, we actually are still on the way to designing the frameworks that would work for investment. And in this respect, quite an exemplary role is played by European Union Green Deal, which is a policy that is clearly aiming to create economy of low emissions, that highlights the development to be environmentally and socially friendly compared to industrialization that we have known in the 20th century. And what is super important for procurement, the EU policies, they are clearly recognizing the strategic capacities of procurement to bring the new markets to the business and focus on making food, textile, technology, and public infrastructure more sustainable. So how it is being done in practice? In practice, it's actually quite a long way from a pledge the government would make on climate change policies to designing and delivering a sustainable infrastructure project. And here, what procurement policies have to have in mind that this is actually a quite wider framework that is going from environmental through social governance and financial standards. And procurement has to capture the objectives from these targets and deliver it in practice when the project of infrastructure is being contracted. So the next issue about are we ready? It is a question whether we have legal barriers to be green in public procurement, or we have no regulation of green public procurement at the moment. So the answer is somewhere in the middle. So we have seen, and this has been demonstrated by academic research, in particular, you will hear it from SAPIENS speakers later today, that there is a very clear correlation between the levels of green achievement in public sector infrastructure and the rules of green procurement made as obligatory for specific jurisdiction. However, this is not so easily seen on the market today because green procurement standards, whatever any of these that I have mentioned before, is applied by the government. they are voluntary, and they are voluntary even in the countries that are leading on designing public procurement footprint registries, on promoting life cycle costing, and adjusting product and service declarations to include information about carbon footprint. So this is voluntary on one side. On the other side, we can see a selective application. So countries are targeting specific product categories, and they use procurement policies to make it greener. And this is true for various industries, but we don't see a horizontal application across the market. And finally, something that I was very sad to find in research conducted by Sustainability Institute. Some of the EU countries, they are actually declaring less than 5% of green procurement aspects in their procurement on the annual level. Lithuania here is a different story, but I will get back to it later to look how they have approached the topic in question. So when we look at what the market tells us last year, we see that procurement function is reporting that they have increased requests for purchasing sustainable goods and services. However, there is still this cost barrier because public sector buyers and commercial buyers, they are unwilling to pay more for sustainable goods and services. However, at the same time, when it has been researched what is blocking this absorption of green policies, cost-dominated selections, which were a bad boy of public procurement for a good while, they were pointed out only by 1/3 of interviewed in this research. So essentially, we are down to no visibility into the supply chain, and we are down to no established industry metrics, and essentially we are down to insufficient regulation. So what we specifically have highlighted in this respect, it is a question that there is still no definition what constitutes green procurement, even in the European Union, which is pretty well regulated already. And this lack of definition is preventing the uptake of green procurement in the public sector by the public sector buyers. And the second issue that has been highlighted in this research, it is the question that speed is essentially very much dependent on how demanding the governments are towards public sector clients, and whether they propose a clear pathway in terms of budgetary and financing commitments, as well as they provide digital tools to make it happen on the market. And finally, looking at OECD research, they have found out in 22 status report that for majority of the OECD member states, which is a much wider community than European Union countries, there is no transparent information about how much green procurement we have on the market. There is only available some information, which is basically saying that, okay, against the total spending per annum, this percentage is dedicated to green procurement without any further details regarding whether this includes green infrastructure. So what we are looking at the regulatory frameworks today, it is a question of how the green is prescribed and regulated, so we don't end up in the case where green infrastructure is not green, but is greenwashed, and whether we are able to have standards that are legally binding for the governments. So we are still looking into how the governments use the policies and legislation to turn the commitments into the projects. And in order not to make it too depressing, I have included this slide because it says how much utilities can do in terms of greening themselves. I have mentioned Lithuania, and this is what I would like to highlight what the government is doing. The government has publicly committed to 100 green procurement by 2030, and they are progressing this agenda. And this is the extract from the National Audit Office report, which is telling us, yes, the progress is made. Yes, the goal is ambitious, but the government still has to tackle how to provide enough implementation measures and how to be more transparent about what it actually means green procurement. So this is being ended up by the comment from the audit office that government has to allocate separate financing to allow the green policies to be applied horizontally in the market. And the positive note that I have promised you, this is about how municipalities are dealing with the climate change agenda and how the EBRD is contributing to this process. So well-known examples for municipal governments targeting zero-emission construction sites and circular economy standards for the transactions in the market are Copenhagen, Helsinki, Oslo, and Stockholm. They are well-known advanced champions of green procurement and green investment. But you will also see that in the latest years, Barcelona, Berlin, Bremen, Hamburg, and Vienna, they also stipulated a clear green procurement of public infrastructure policy that covers all their local government investment, regardless whether this is funded from the state budget or municipal budget, or it is commissioned through concessions and PPPs. And yes, these all municipalities, they are coming from the developed countries, but it does not prevent us to see that the same trend is visible in the transition economies. And this is where EBRD Green Cities program is coming to, because it has been working with municipal governments all over the EBRD regions since 2016, and is covering at the moment 58 municipalities in the EBRD countries of operations. What they do, they promote approaches that were tested in the more advanced economies and adjusting them to the transition economy that faces more challenges than developed countries may face. So what is to highlight under this intervention? It is that municipalities in transition countries, they are learning to build a coalition of their citizens around policies which are targeting using green procurement to deliver sustainable municipal services. And they are leading digital transformation efforts to make sure that we have new municipal infrastructure responding to green procurement and green investment goals. So this is something that is a positive note for stating the discussion for today. And if you have any questions, I believe we will take them all together at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisa.
Dorina, airlines made a miracle and you are here. Very good. Thank you so much. So I'm handing over the moderation back to Geneva. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Elisa, for your very insightful presentation and for, despite all the challenges countries face in implementation of green procurement, we see some light in the end of the tunnel, and we see not only the developing countries make significant achievements in this regard, but also a number of developing countries and in transition economies in particular just register pretty good achievements and showcase for other countries in the region. And without further ado, I would now invite our distinguished panelist, Judge Mark Steiner, Swiss Federal Administrative Court, to show us and to give us insights from the GPA and how it promotes green procurement and how it can be used in practical terms. So the floor is yours. We will be asking Elisa to help us with sharing of the presentation. Elisa Rakilan.
Sure. Can you see the screen?
Yes, this is the set of slides. Perfect.
Yeah, just
It's an honor and a real pleasure to speak to you about the legal set of arguments on government procurement agreement in the World Trade Organization context. We have heard from Reto Malacrida that the WTO wants to be part of the solution climate policy-wise and not part of the problem. That was the declaration of the Director General of the WTO on the Dubai Climate Summit. And this was quite new for the scene because this was the official WTO position on sustainability 20 years ago. So there's quite some significant change on this. And the same is true for the EBRD, speaking about itself as an investment green transition bank. I mean, this is obviously a new policy mindset, and that's really interesting to be tracing those changes. And tracing those changes means to discuss how we can interpret legally the WTO GPA in a way that enhances this kind of development. When we were taught legally, Mr. Michel Nussbaumer, as well as myself, some decades ago here in Switzerland, we were taught that every policy scheme that's not directly aimed at fostering market access and competition is suspicious. From trade perspective, from WTO perspectives. This was especially true for sustainability topics. And that's what was the legal concept we were entering in when we were young lawyers. And meanwhile, there had been a lot of developments, a lot of evolving set of legal arguments, and we have to trace that and to explain that to people that we can really show that the GPA 2012, the revised GPA, brings with it a different mindset compared to the GPA 1994. And that's my mission today. And for that, I did the same thing already 2017 at the Symposium on Sustainable Procurement of the WTO, exactly the same topic. And so today I can limit myself to show you how big the changes are even between 2017 and 2024. And that will be the idea of the next few minutes presentation. The next slide, please. So the idea is that we go into it as a WTO legal instrument, the Government Procurement Agreement, and say, okay, the first thing we need to assess what can be said about best value for money. Because if the idea is to award contracts on the lowest price only, we can forget about sustainability. So first, we have to have a concept in place that makes the best price quality ratio the aim and purpose of the whole regulation. And if we have that, then we can go for instance, green public procurement. And that's basically the idea of the presentation. The next slide, please. This means at first that we have to have a new concept about the role of the government procurement agreement. The classical view of the 90s was that is a market access tool and nothing else. And this has changed considerably because the GPA 2012 explicitly makes references to integrity and corruption. This was dealt with as a non-WTO topic a decade ago. So every delegate just said automatically corruption is not a WTO topic in the 90s. And some years later, the GPA 2012 gave a clear message that without preventing corruption, fostering market access is useless. This is linked. And this new message is a more holistic view of aim and purpose of the regulation. And this is a paradigm shift. And the same is also true for sustainability. And that makes the government procurement agreement one of the most progressive legal instruments the WTO has. But this is not conscious to people because the lawyers think that's something for technocrats I don't deal with. But if they could see how progressive is it and that this allows to invent the future, they would think otherwise about it. Next slide, please. So this was a GPA workshop. That was the first workshop 2019 mentioning the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the WTO said, we are aware that our policy schemes and our legal thinking must be part of the sustainability goals, development goals concept. And that's interesting. And that's definitely now the common basis of every international organization in Geneva. Next slide, please. And that's interesting because what we have been taught decades ago was there is kind of a purity principle of fostering market access and competition, and every other policy scheme is a disturbance of that purity idea. Yes, that's what we have been told when being students. But this is not true. The government procurement agreement, ladies and gentlemen, is an open instrument because it needs to fit for Israel purposes, for Singapore purposes, Central Asia, United States, and European Union, and not mentioning Switzerland, and they all have very different concepts. So it cannot be understood as being forcing all those to a Milton Friedman style of capitalism. That's not the idea. The GPA is an open instrument allowing a diversity of economic policy concepts. That's the real core of legal thinking on the GPA. And Sue Arrowsmith was definitely the most important legal thinker making that argument. And I'm entirely convinced, obviously, of this. But we have to prove this. The next slide, please. The GPA wants to set minimum standards on market access, non-discrimination, and transparency, but is not about the full-fledged regulation on economic policy concept. That's not the idea of the GPA. The idea is about minimum standards. We had to discuss the handling of abnormally low tenders according to Swiss law. And the German scholar said, it cannot realistically be expected from the GPA to find a substantial solution for that kind of detailed problem because it's about minimum standard and it allows flexibility when discussing the questions how we should deal with abnormally low tenders. So we have policy space and that's the important message we need to consider when legally discussing the GPA. Next slide. Same is true how the award is, how the contract is awarded. You can award the contract based on the lowest price only or on the best price quality ratio. The GPA leaves you the two possibilities. Next slide, please. So the ideas from the GPA is you can go for the most advantageous tender, which is best value for money or the best price quality ratio, or the lowest price alone. But it becomes crystal clear. But if you foster the lowest price alone without very ambitious technical specifications and ability test, you will get not what you want in terms of best price quality ratio and sustainability. So what we should do is encourage the countries to use the most advantageous tender approach. The US formally said, we are the industrialized, we use the best quality ratios, but the developing countries, the lowest price is fine. And that's not what we want to see, ladies and gentlemen. But we want to fight the dictatorship of the lowest price. That's the European Union concept. Next slide, please. So, and if we know that the best price quality ratio is what we need, then we can say as a next step, sustainability is just part of the quality as we understand it. And then the whole thing will work. But the European Union has the same problem as described by Elisa from EBRD, that not every member state is as ambitious as it should be. And in a recent report, they say this should inspire our new policy schemes and regulations a greater reliance on non-price aspects for the procurement of goods and services in general. And that was exactly what I tried to explain. So for once, I know that the European Union and Switzerland are on the same page. Next slide, please. And the same thing is true for Switzerland. They said in their new Public Procurement Act that the most advantageous tender will be awarded the contract. And they don't say the most economically advantageous, not to give the price too much weight, but to give the quality the weight. So the award on the lowest price only is forbidden, is excluded, and it's exceptionally allowed if we are dealing with a highly standardized subject matter of a contract. Only then the price can play a significant role, and in every other procurement, the quality is the core of the thing. And this is the mindset of the new regulation of public procurement. And you see how significant, how very significant this evolvement is compared to what people like both of us have learned decades ago when at university. That's really a change. Next slide. So from a GPA perspective, the GPA 2012 said, technical specification, we want to make sure by framing this agreement that the conservation of natural resources or protect the environment is a possible technical specification, because this has been disputed before by some people. And here it's crystal clear. So the GPA 2012 is crystal clear, has a positive attitude and green technical specification. What is sometimes overlooked, the next slide, please, is that the same thing is true for evaluation or award criteria. It's just the same, because environmental characteristics are explicitly mentioned to be a possible evaluation or award criterion. And this is good news. This is something new. This is a change. And we should explain people that there is something different compared to the GPA 94. And this kind of messages must be promoted not only amongst technocrats, but amongst decision makers. Yes, and that's our common duty of WTO, of EBRD, of the Swiss government, of everyone involved, wanting to promote sustainability issues. And what's even better is that technical specification can be used to describe the process of production, not only the product, but the process, even if the process has not direct effect on how the product looks like. And that's different to the normal PPMs debate in the WTO, because there is a heavy fight going on how far the methods of production can be included in PPMs in a normal WTO treaty. But for the plurilateral government procurement agreement, there is a specific rules that says it can be used and described and, let's say, given points or, let's say, asked for as a minimum standards in a larger measure compared to the normal PPM debate in WTO. And why is that so? Next slide, please. Because the normal PPM debate is if you have trade sanctions, import ban, and you regulate trade and private consumption, then PPMs are difficult from a trade policy perspective. But in public procurement, you don't regulate private consumption. You make public consumer choice. That's the idea of it. And that's why you have a wider policy space compared to normal PPM debate inside the WTO. This is really interesting because it's just another object of the regulation. Normally, when states regulate trade, they regulate enterprises. And here what's regulated is the public sector, the buying entities. And this makes a radical difference. And we need to explain this to people. The next slide. And that's why recent publications said that the GPA idea on process methods and methods of production is kind of a lex specialis, so a special rule on PPMs which applies for government public procurement. And this is a real interesting thing because this allows for more policy space, obviously. Yes. Next slide, please. And this is why the GPA has foreseen a work program to go even further in terms of sustainability. This for two reasons. The social aspects were difficult to negotiate, so they postpone it in the work program and say, we will discuss here about the social aspects. And secondly, we want to be more specific on the green public procurement practices that are allowed under the GPA. We want to show which best practice example could be good or discuss which pattern of fostering green public procurement is good from a trade policy perspective. So there's a lot of potential within this work program and sustainable procurement of the WTO. Next slide, please. And this is especially true because that's the most recent news in this, because there is a joint statement of the European Union and the US. They set a common catalog of best practices in green public procurement. Isn't it crazy? 10 years ago, each of us would have thought this is unthinkable that that ever happens. And for geopolitical reasons, suddenly it works. Isn't this just amazing? And what is crystal clear that if such things happen, this will stimulate the debate inside the work program of the GPA and make it meaningful. And that's a great perspective, isn't it? According to me, this will stimulate the discussions of the WTO member states within the government procurement agreement, because if this is on the table, then we cannot avoid the topic anymore. We need to go the way forward somehow, perhaps not precisely the same way as indicated here, but you can possibly do nothing. You must find your way forward, and that's the good news about this. The next And probably last slide. Yes. And that's the interesting thing we see today. When we have been legally educated in the 90s at international level, there was the WTO and the dangerous member states with their welfare policies threatening the purity of market access and competition of WTO. That was the classical trade policy thinking in the 90s. Nowadays, it's quite different. We are here on international level, the WTO. We have here United Nations Environment Programme. We have here the ILO, and they should build together a coherent system of norms and understand themselves as part of the same legal order. So a more holistic and policy coherence-oriented view has to be applied to make the whole legal system a coherent and trustworthy system of norms. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Mark, for very interesting and knowledge-sharing presentation. Thank you for just letting us know how significantly the GPA improved and the huge opportunities it offers to the GPA parties, but also to others who are on their way, but can implement those norms and regulations that would fulfill or would just going a bit ahead of the journey even to be compliant. So implementing these green public procurement instruments and measures, it's of a huge importance, and most importantly is the overall international cooperation and working together, looking and going in the same direction. And this interesting and beautiful example of cooperation between US and EU is a good showcase and a good example for developing countries to also target the same direction and going in the same direction. And now I would open the floor for questions to our speakers, to Mark and Elisa. I would start then with the first one.
Thank you so much, Dorina. I understand that we have one question in the chat, and perhaps we could take at it together, because I think it's touching upon the research I have completed with the EBRD team, and what Mark has been discussing as a change in the government attitude. So the question is how we calculate the high sustainability, and essentially the answer is that today, thanks to a much better recognition of climate change agenda, we have not only policy level direction in the sustainable development goals and their indicators, but we also have a specific concept of procurement, environmental, social, and development standards, which are becoming a part of the mainstream industry for private sector. So sustainability today has ratings, has indexes, has recognition for every standard business transactions. So we have moved a long way from so-called business social responsibility to procurement ESG capacity that today covers the social, covers the environmental, as well as governance and financial aspects. So yes, we have ratings, yes, we have indexes. The most popular one is perhaps EcoVadis, but I don't want to advertise here commercial approaches, but yes, we have them, and they are calculable, and there are platforms which are doing precisely that. They tell the companies how sustainable they are, how sustainable are their supply chains, and where they rank on the targets which are created by the new regulatory frameworks that are embracing procurement more and more. So what I have said regarding a lack of the standards on the government, it's lack of the standards what the government may want to see in terms of sustainability commitments from the suppliers. But when it comes to what suppliers can do, this is very well recognized, up to having a standing in the international industry standards for several sectors. Mark, over to you.
Thank you. Only what gets measured gets managed. And that's exactly the point. I mean, Elisa, she tells us that for decades, isn't that? So I remember your presentations for a long time. And in Switzerland, we have gone through a very interesting process because the Bern University of Applied Sciences has been granted an enormous funding of the Swiss National Research Funds to measure the ambition levels of call for tenders. The good thing about public procurement is that call for tenders must be published. So you have an enormous amount of data on public procurement. And so what we will do at the Bern University of Applied Sciences, we will unite the knowledge of economists, lawyers, and computer linguistic specialists to look for keywords, to look for weightings of criteria, and to define ambition levels of published call for tenders to assess the ambition level of procurement policies. And this will be a very, very interesting journey. And what we really need to do is to foster exchange between people doing just the same within their different countries and discuss the methods how to do this.
Thank you very much, Mark. Dirk, please.
Yes, hello and good morning. Don't know, you probably can't see me, but can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank you very much, Elisa and Mark, for your very interesting and very timely contributions to this whole debate. So my name is Dirk Plutz. I work in the Procurement Policy and Advisory Department of EBRD. And I just wanted to basically comment on a couple of things. The first thing is that in addition to what was presented this morning, I wanted to just alert everybody to the fact that the heads of procurement of the IFIs around the world have actually issued a joint statement on sustainable public procurement. And this was done last autumn with the commitment that the IFIs want to try and, well, I use the word harmonize, but at least try and get together enough to develop methods of how to approach the subject and to make sure that our countries of operation where the respective IFIs work walk towards a greener future in the area of procurement. And in addition to that, we have a working group amongst the IFIs, and we are all working together to try and find methods, to try and find the right approaches, to see where there may be shortcomings and to see where we can advance things further. And I just wanted to sort of update you on that in case some of the audience weren't aware of this fact. So we are working on that. And it also includes developing respective guidances on sustainable public procurement. And in this regard, I just wanted to make one comment to especially what Mark said about what is essentially rated criteria and economically most advantageous tenders. Indeed, EBRD has sort of had this in its policy for many years already, and we've basically already not only always looked at lowest price. We have especially always looked at things like how the supply chain is organized, but also how costs down the line have been taken into account. You know, like if for example, if you have a bus project where it's not only considered how much the buses cost, but also how much it costs to run those buses over, say, a period of 10 years. So we're trying to incorporate all that, but at the same time, I just want to add one little bit of caution to using non-financial criteria. And I say again, it's not all about a lowest price, but you know, we at EBRD at least think it's actually quite useful to try and monitorize as many aspects as possible, so that you don't have to fall back on too many rated criteria, because this could also lead to other hazards. You know, again, like for example, in the corruption area, where subjectivity is introduced, corruption levels rise immediately. And so I just wanted to give this sort of as a little background. You know, it's a little bit different from if you have a big project to evaluate in the European Union or the US, or if you have to do the same in many of our countries where maybe executing agencies are not as sophisticated yet to cope with this kind of thing. Okay, so, but anyway, I don't want to put water on the fire here and just extinguish it. To the contrary, I just want to make sure that we have this debate as well, considering those aspects that I've just mentioned. But thanks again, Elisa. Thanks again, Mark. Very interesting contributions and very important. Thanks.
Thank you, Dirk. Mark, please.
That's a very interesting point you make. So there is a relation between the maturity level of a country governance-wise and the margin of appreciation then can be given to public entities to foster sustainability. I totally agree. When I was present in Berlin at the conference to present the EU directives 2014, a Transparency International representative said, this whole sustainability thing is a bad thing because it allows for margins of appreciation for public entities, and this is dangerous. And then Heide Rühle, the rapporteur of the Internal Market Committee, said, Mark Steiner must be sitting there in the audience. He must answer this question now for me because I can't. And I did. For me, it's crystal clear that the better governance level you have in a state, the more you can allow margin of appreciation when going for a multifunctional approach within the use of different award criteria and weighting of those award criteria. And the poorer your governance level is, the more you will go for things like financial criteria, like technical specification with an easy yes or no answer and stuff like this. It depends. But don't make a general statement, you shouldn't allow for margin of appreciation because this is dangerous, or you should go for this and this policy choice. It depends on the governance maturity level of the public entities in question.
Thank you very much, Mark. So we have another question from the online audience. Kulanan Bonise, you have the floor for your question.
I have aimed to respond to the question number 2 in writing, but we have a very interesting point which is taking up on what Derek has been commenting. What extent, what level can be considered as sufficient use of sustainability criteria in public procurement for GPA, for countries with GPA observer status? This is obviously down to how the SDGs are tailoring the policies and objectives of specific governments. But essentially, what we see more and more, this is going to be presented exactly in the next presentation. So let me just recommend the work that has been done by International Trade Center, and you will have a full answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So basically, you introduced our next speakers from ICT. So we have Mr. Gilles Chapelle and Antonella that would be going basically in the practical aspect. So it's one thing to have everything in the legal framework, but it's much more complicated to work in terms of practical terms of implementation and how to work with green public procurement policies, strategies, and tools. And precisely to this question, Jill and Antonella will give us the answer. So the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, great. So first, thank you to the EBRD and the WTO for this invitation to speak. So I and my co-speaker, Antonella, will speak about the forthcoming toolkit on green public procurement, which is a collaborative effort of the International Trade Center and the World Trade Organization. So this forthcoming toolkit provides a comprehensive overview on how green public procurement can be effectively integrated into both domestic and international trade policy frameworks, offering practical guidance and insights based on extensive research, national experiences, and best practices. A key underlying aim is to create a favorable environment for private sector growth, participation in international value chains, foreign direct investment, and technological innovation consistent with sustainability objectives and values. As such, this toolkit sets out a framework for implementing potential adaptations to public procurement policies that can be used by governments in responding to the threat posed by climate change and promoting environmental sustainability. It envisions a step-by-step approach to implement the necessary policy changes. This toolkit does recognize that each country has a different context and priorities, and therefore may wish to address sustainability and climate change issues in different ways. Now, meeting the challenges and seizing the opportunities that arise from green public procurement will require both the adoption of new domestic policy frameworks by governments and adaptation to new frameworks by the private sector. Therefore, a whole-of-government approach is needed, and care must be taken to ensure that the new frameworks and approaches that are adopted respect the interests of MSMEs, especially in developing countries, and do not impose undue burdens on them. In sum, the purpose of this toolkit is to assist governments in responding to the global climate change crisis through the adoption and implementation of appropriate national policy frameworks. In particular, it is hoped that it will be useful to them in enabling the effective use of public procurement as a tool for the implementation of the Paris Agreement in a manner that will also create opportunities for their MSMEs and other suppliers, as well as attract investors. I would now like to hand over to Antonella, who will provide some more details on the steps set out in the toolkit.
Thank you, Giles. Many thanks. Thanks to EBRD for hosting us today and be able to talk today about this toolkit that was recently introduced by Giles. Indeed, green public procurement represents a transformative approach to public sector purchasing, prioritizing products and services that have a reduced environmental impact throughout their life cycle and also can promote the fight against global climate change. Just to recap a little bit what Giles said before, this toolkit sets the framework for implementing the potential adaptations to public procurement policies in regards to GPP and respond to the threat of global climate change and the promotion of environmental sustainability. At the same time, one of the things that's really actually relevant about this toolkit is its implementation is actually not only for those countries that have already a high regulatory sort of advancement or already culture of GPP. This is actually helpful for those transition economies and developing economies that are actually looking forward to implement a GPP policy from scratch. And just before I start, I would like to mention that in most regulations, sustainability, or in this case, green pool procurement, it's still optional. These considerations are still optional and non-mandatory, with exception of some economies, as in the EU, like Elisa mentioned before. And we're not saying that they should be mandatory. That is part of the discretionary power of the buying authority and of the government. Nevertheless, we do encourage taking the step of actually implementing environmental considerations. And in that sense, this toolkit actually provides some insights on how to promote GPP while also taking into consideration international trade commitments and the interests of SMEs, which actually make a big part of the economy. So throughout the different process, throughout this presentation, I will go through the 7 steps that we have envisioned in order to actually implement the action plan and develop GPP criteria throughout the procurement process, at all stages of the procurement process. So step 1 deals with actually taking stock of the existing conditions, the environmental, regulatory, what's the sort of the legal institutional framework that's actually present? Because as you know, we cannot actually implement GPP and use, for example, environmental considerations in the evaluation of awards if the national law actually only allows to evaluate tenders based on the lowest price criteria. We also have to take into account the institutional framework, that being, for example, are we dealing with a central purchasing body? Are we dealing with many different procurement agencies that have discretionary power regarding their own processes for tenders? What's sort of the scope for open tenders? Are there many cases of actually limited tendering here in the country? So these are all different issues that we have to take into stock and analyze in order to develop the action plan. Other things that must be taken into account, for example, deal with the trade commitments that a country may have. For example, are they part of an FTA that already have sort of a procurement chapter with GPP considerations? How can they actually be able to commit with these, go forward with the commitments if we have some regulatory barriers? In that sense, what can be also the regulatory barriers that can be present in order to impede including GPP or environmental considerations into the framework agreement? And also mapping who are the stakeholders. As I said, not only the central purchasing body or procuring entities or the decentralized or subcentral entities, also how about sort of what's the size of a private sector? Are there companies that are able to produce or to actually deliver services and products that can follow these environmental criteria? What's the role of the chambers of commerce and trade associations? And what's the role actually of these different stakeholders that can actually impact on the action plan? So throughout the presentation, I'm going to be speaking on each one of these steps that I'm talking here, that are here. And for each one of these steps, I will also provide what is our SME approach, in the sense how can actually this step be also adapted to the needs of SMEs. So for the first one, it's important to actually reflect on the last point I just mentioned here, which is assessing the economy's capacity for supplying green goods and services. And this should be also conducted considering SMEs to assess if these can actually be able to play in different priority sectors and are able to deliver the goods and services, and if they can, their capacity and time frame to do so. Also, this helps assess in a preliminary manner how and if SMEs can actually benefit, or if the GPP considerations will lead to substantive costs, becoming this possibly a barrier for their active participation in public procurement markets. This assessment can be done through informal market research, online research, informal dialogues, and more formal consultations, which are actually part of step 3. So on step 3, we're actually talking about developing the roadmap for the National Green Public Procurement Action Plan. And that entails several, let's call it sub-steps. So first, let's talk about kickstarting the GPP action plan. When we talk about kickstarting the GPP action plan, for example, we can involve or set up a working group involving experts and representatives from different institutions, the buying authority, the central purchasing body. This can actually ensure that the right voices are represented throughout the process. Another issue to be considered is actually designing the action plan, in the sense that there is no need to actually draft a GPP action plan or initiative from scratch. Rather, this can actually be derived from experiences and measures already in place in other jurisdictions. For example, I'm not talking only about what the EU or the US has done as more developed jurisdictions regarding the role of GPP, but also taking into account plans like national plans for the implementation of SDGs. This can also be helpful. Another element, it's actually to communicate. Communication is an essential part of launching the GPP action plan. GPP is most effective if there is a clear understanding of its meaning and the reasons for its introduction. And lastly, in this slide, let's talk about creating a general commitment to implement GPP policies. So in the case that there is no, sort of a hardcore commitment is difficult, a recommendation would be, for example, to draft non-binding commitments from the procuring entities to implement, when possible, GPP considerations into their public tenders. When talking about developing this action plan, there are several components that are real essential in identifying and actually developing the action plan. So here we're talking about identifying targets, objectives. We talk about actually prioritizing services and product sectors, because it's very difficult to actually implement in a transversal, horizontal manner. So it's very important to actually prioritize sectors, see which are actually the low-hanging fruits, and start with these sectors. Another component is actually to think about the technical specifications that can actually include already environmental criteria, create a methodology for evaluation and monitoring the plan. So as I said before, there is no need to actually do this from scratch. It's really important to learn from from the experiences in other jurisdictions. And here I would like to bring, for example, the experience of the EU, which has published 20 sector priority, GPP criteria for 20 sectors, for 20 priority sectors. And also, for example, what the US General Services Administration has published with the Green Procurement compilation, which provides already important and comprehensive resources for buying authorities. On the MISMI approach, to promote MISMI participation when designing this strategy, this actually should ensure that MISMI's interests and possibly the challenge that they can face are identified and appropriately reflected throughout the action plan. This includes, for example, providing sufficient information on tenders, following appropriate timeframes, facilitating the use of electronic tools or e-procurement for transparency and access for bidding process, thinking of environmental considerations that are non-discriminatory or equivalent, and if appropriate, support financing instruments that can actually allow MISMIs to participate or even consider earlier payments, for example, for awarded MISMIs, and different things that can actually help them be part of the national plan and to participate throughout different procurement processes that include already these environmental criteria. Because as you may know, it may be really expensive for some of the MISMIs to actually participate here. So that's why it's very important to take them into consideration already at the moment when we are developing the action plan. Step 3, let's talk about a stakeholder dialogue and consultations. So consultations are actually essential to optimize the efficient implementation of the GPP action plan. Understand, for example, what the market has to offer, prevent the creation of unnecessary barriers for participation, and avoid creating unrealistic expectations, not only from the side of the buying authority with really sort of really high standards for evaluating the tenders, but also creating unrealistic expectations on what the market actually has to offer. So how can we do this? There are several ways we can actually work through these questionnaires or online surveys, observations and analysis of existing user patterns, inviting actually users to attend supplier demonstrations as part of a preliminary market consultations. There are different ways in which we actually integrate the private sector into a constructive dialogue with the buying authority. And on the MISMI approach for step 3, let's consider, for example, that here MISMIs, or at least those in priority sectors, can be surveyed to analyze actually what are their strengths or existing challenges that they may face. As mentioned earlier, the steps in the toolkit are not meant to be done in a sort of linear manner. We can actually go back and forth as necessary. So actually creating or having this constructive dialogue with the private sector and with MISMIs can actually help us go back one further step to step 2 and actually adjust the action plan to a plan that actually works for all actors. Step 4. Step 4 deals with actually supporting the national green procurement strategy through training, capacity building. This is about talking to with the public authorities and telling them, teaching them actually the best practices on integrating green public, like on GPP criteria into the tender process throughout the entire process, meaning from pre-procurement, designing, evaluation criteria, all the way to the post-performance part of the process. And here it's really important that a big part of promoting GPP is actually in the hands of the government and convincing them that just accepting the lowest price is not a suitable practice anymore. Here I would like to repeat what Mark said actually, and I really like that dictatorship of the lowest price. So there is an important role in capacity building, not only for the public authorities, but also for the government, and letting them know, as I said, that the lowest price is not anymore the way to go if you actually want to integrate GPP criteria into the procurement process. Also, it's good and really efficient to integrate or to at least involve the local community, because these are the people who are actually will be benefiting from the procured subject matter and the direct recipient of any negative externality. So who are we talking about involving different stakeholders? When we talk about stakeholders, we talk about the public sector and also we talk about the private sector. So we refer to senior officials, government representatives, policymakers, legislators, and on the private sector, we refer to suppliers, business community, trade associations, the local residents, and also a big component here is actually to involve the civil society organizations, because these can actually play a very important role in promoting GPP in public procurement. On the MISMI focus or a MISMI approach for step 4, let me just mention that one of the big issues for MISMI's participation, for MISMI participation in regular procurement is actually the lack of training or knowledge on how to actually participate or how to actually bid for a government contract. As such, this step is really vital to ensure actual effective involvement, and also making them aware not only on how to participate, but also how to sort of participate while integrating all these environmental considerations that we will see throughout step 5. So step 5 is actually what we call throughout the toolkit the heart of the matter. Why? Because this is actually provides examples of best practices across all stages of the procurement process. As I said, this begins with the pre-procurement stage, with the preparation for the procurement, the design of the procurement process, the procurement stage itself with the qualification of suppliers, preparation of technical specifications, evaluation criteria, and all the way to the post-contract award stage. For example, when we're talking about the performance or the contract management stage. Here we have, throughout the toolkit, we have provided many examples on best practices, and I'm really glad to say that an excellent new instrument that actually complements very much this section is the US-EU catalog on best practices on GPP. That also provides a lot of best practices that can be integrated throughout the e-procurement or throughout the public procurement process. So when we talk about best practices, we talk, for example, about already defining the subject matter of a tender with environmental criteria. For example, the purchase of 100% electricity from renewable energy sources. And it's really important here to keep it as wide as possible in the sense of actually leaving some creativity to the tenders to actually offer how they will achieve this 100% electricity from renewable sources. That means this can be from solar panels, from wind sources, from water. There are a bunch of different options that we can leave. So it's very important to actually be creative, and while trying to implement these criteria, also lead a scope for the creativity of the offerers. When we're talking about technical specifications, we can also implement the use of eco-labels that deal with environmental performance. And also we can talk about not only the product itself, but the process that actually helps us to promote environmental criteria. For example, the catering of food that is organically produced, or the electricity that is produced from renewable sources. So we don't only look at the product, we can also look at the process on how to develop and implement environmental criteria. When we're talking about qualification criteria, we can use, there are different standards. We can talk about the ISO, we can talk about having environmental management systems, and also we can talk about one of the questions that I saw earlier is that in some cases, actually suppliers can be excluded based on previous, or the bar based on previous environmental infringements. For example, pollution of water, disposing waste illegally during the performance of previous contracts. When we're talking about the contract award criteria, it's really important not to set the main criteria on the lowest price. We have to move away from that criteria. Rather, we should deal with other criteria. For example, using environmental management systems, considering CO2 performance of the businesses that are part of the tender, the use of green vehicles, how they actually can reduce the packaging for the products being offered. And when we're talking about the contract performance conditions, we talk about, for example, specifying, these are examples, for example, specifying maximum number of deliveries per month to avoid using vehicles that can pollute the environment, requiring the supplier to actually go back and recall the packaging that can actually be recycled or reused. And other examples that are not only here in this toolkit, but as I said, are also pretty much reflected in the recently published EU-US catalog. So I highly recommend to go through that document as well. Overall, let me just say that by embedding environmental criteria into the procurement processes, public authorities can actually lead by example, fostering markets for sustainable goods and services, while also achieving cost saving and efficiency gains. In this way, this actually drives the market and a change across industries, promoting the development of new products and new services that are already under the umbrella of these environmental criteria. So for this step number 5, for the MIFMI approach, let me just mention that the main point here to actually take into account is to acknowledge that certain environmental considerations can actually entail barriers for MIFMI participation. To that end, it's really important to design the process taking into account the MIFMI capacities, or actually to think about alternatives that can be explored and flexibilities that can be enacted. For example, smaller lots to allow MISMIs to perform the contract, or set some requirements that can actually help them participate in a less, let's call it in a more flexible manner. So let's go to step 6, which is personally one of my favorites, which actually deals with mainstreaming GPP into international and regional trade agreements. So here, it's really important to actually already elaborate on the work of several international organizations and MDBs, such as the OECD, the World Bank, the EBRD, who have already made spectacular progress on actually developing and implementing GPP into the public procurement mainframe. Also here, I would like to mention again a little bit about the GPA. Mark already mentioned how the GPA is actually an instrument that allows for GPP considerations to be embedded while being thoughtful about not infringing trade commitments. So for example, when we're talking about the GPA, I will just mention articles 10.6 and 10.9, which actually allow environmental considerations to be woven into the technical specifications for core procurement, and also for the use of environmental characteristics when we are talking about the evaluation criteria. And then again, the GPA already provides or allows countries or its parties to actually use and go further, because it says, well, for the awarding of the contract, you can also use other criteria rather than just the lowest price. And that's really important. As I said, having that is already sort of the first step to actually implement GPP into a national legislation. So here I have a couple of examples of how GPP considerations are actually embedded in some trade agreements. I will not go further on this because I think one of our colleagues from Sapiens will be dealing with this. So, but just let me mention that the GPA is actually, as it's known, the gold standard in trade agreements that cover public procurement. And in many of the cases, actually, these different FTAs or regional trade agreements actually just transpose or copy the main articles of the GPA. And here I would just like to rescue that CETA, the EU and Canada agreement, actually goes farther on this technical specification. As we can see, most of these agreements already have some GPP consideration, but mostly these relate to technical specifications. And on CETA, we see that this actually also picks up from the GPA and allows environmental characteristics to be woven into the evaluation criteria. Again, on the MISMI approach for trade agreements, it's really important to consider that most procurement under trade agreements actually happens above a certain threshold. So below that threshold, there's actually scope for relevant practices that can actually include MISMIs while being consistent with trade commitments. And lastly, let's go to step number 7. Step number 7, it's all about monitoring what has been done, assessing what has been done, and how can this be reintegrated into the entire process. I would like just to recap or mention again a phrase that I like and that actually Mark mentioned earlier today, and that is that what gets measured gets managed. This actually brings us back to step 1, because now we have all the information on monitoring the performance and assessing whether the national action plan was actually successful. If yes, perfect. If then we can see actually how can we improve the efficiencies and the national action plan. If not, then we just recap, go a step further, go a step backwards, and just actually analyze how can we actually improve the national action plans based on this performance or this previous performance. So as I said, this actually takes us to step number 1, where we talk about taking stock of existing conditions and constraints. So here, this is a really important part because, as I said, this actually allows us to improve the action plan, and not only to improve, but actually amplify the scope, the sectors, and everything that's related to actually going forward with DPP criteria into public procurement. Just one final consideration on the MISMI focus for step 7. It's always important to actually monitor the performance of MISMIs just to see if there are barriers that needs to be addressed, or if there are criteria that can be more flexible in terms of actually allowing MISMIs to participate in the criteria and to actually help them be part of the industry, be a part of the capacities, and actually help them develop new products and new services that can be used when using or when implementing the National Action Plan or environmental considerations into the public procurement sector. Before I go, I'll pass again the microphone to Giles, who's going to be talking about the next steps on this toolkit.
Thank you very much, Antonella, for that overview. So in brief, the next steps. So first is the publication of the ITC WTO toolkit and its launch. So this will be coming in the next couple of months or so. And when the official launch does happen, we'll inform all the participants so that they can join. I think it will probably be a hybrid event. So that's the first step. Second, we're going to also this year look at some sector-specific applications for this GPP analysis. And I think we plan to start with office building construction, but we hope to extend this to other sectors in the future. And third step, and I think the most critical one, would be to launch country-specific technical assistance on green public procurement. So this is something we would hope to start working on, later this year, in order that this toolkit will be used as a key starting point, a framework document that will then be useful to work further with policymakers and other stakeholders in developing countries in order to advance and promote green public procurement. So thank you once again, and please let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Antonella.
Thank you, Giles. Thank you, Arina.
Yeah, indeed, looking forward to just publishing the toolkit and, of course, the technical assistance and support that you are planning to provide to specific countries and developing and transition economies in particular. This is of great support and contribution to their implementing, because we know very well that in many cases, so governments from these countries on their own face issues and challenges in implementing the GPP. So basically, we were supposed to take the questions afterwards, but I see Majed, he wants to ask the question now, so I think we'll make an exception. And Majed, please, you have the floor, and then we'll go forward.
Well, thank you very much. You don't need to take me now if you are planning to take the questions later.
Okay, if you can just keep your question for the after the other two presentations, and then we will open the floor for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thanks again, Antonella and Giles. And now we will continue with Natalia Spataru from SAPIENS, who will give us a perspective in terms of life cycle costing and the GPP. So Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I am trying to share my screen now. Can you see it?
Not yet. Should be coming.
Okay.
Now we have it.
I think now it's stable. Great. So good morning, everyone. My name is Natalia Spataru, and I'll be speaking today about sustainability in public procurement and life cycle cost evaluation methods based on the legal tools offered to us by the Government Procurement Agreement. Before going into my presentation, I'd like to introduce you briefly my PhD project. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Birmingham and also a Sapiens Network early stage researcher. And my PhD thesis focuses on analyzing how a third generation free trade agreement instrument may be used to further sustainability through their public procurement chapters. So my research is closely tied also to the objectives of the GPA. And in my research, when using sustainability, I'm approaching this concept from a three-dimensional perspective. I'm looking at the environmental aspects of the sustainability, at the social aspects, and also at the SMEs promotion or facilitation through public procurement that also has an economic aspect. And I'd like to present to you my topic, the points of my today's discussion. So I'll first introduce the key terms and objectives. I'll go on with the challenges of why maybe life cycle cost is not such a widely tool and what can it mitigate when used. I'll also emphasize the key benefits and the expected results. Then I'll present you the roadmap of that is a synthesis of my PhD research and also collaboration with the EBRD. Then I'll speak about life cycle costing, implementation and performance monitoring and what are the expected results. So Elisa Nevmadomska previously mentioned that there is no green public procurement definition. A legal like set in stone definition, and of course I agree with her. However, there is a common understanding of what is green public procurement, even though it's not official. So green public procurement helps building sustainable consumption and production patterns, and it also has a key role, a very important one, in building a resource efficient economy, and also it can lead to eco-innovation. On the other hand, life cycle costing, when implemented in public procurement, it's a method that considers all the costs incurred during the lifetime of a product, that sometimes also experts call it from cradle to grave. So it makes public procurement actually a very cost-effective approach, and it supports also the achievement of value for money that is national objective of many jurisdictions. And I'd like today to introduce the methodology for life cycle cost evaluation and deployment in national public procurement systems based also on the legal framework that the GPA provides. And this, the utility of, or maybe the efficiency of the LCC would be increased if used along with an e-procurement tool. Based on procurement outcomes of certain selected goods purchased by the public entity. So what challenges can applying life cycle cost evaluation in public procurement tackle? First of all, there is very few energy efficient infrastructure. There are recent trends, recent developments that are very much focused on enhancing energy efficient infrastructure. However, they are still very few. Applying LCC may enhance their existence and their future development. Moreover, digital public services usually lack accessibility and real-time information on LCC. The classic procurement method prioritizes the upfront cost of the product. What does it mean? That they actually usually public procurement authorities prefer maybe to pay an initial sum that is smaller at the beginning of the procurement process. But however, in time, these products are proved to cost much more. It has, of course, an adverse impact on environment as it does not pay attention to recycling, environmental aspects. And as I already mentioned, it's a higher overall expenses over a product's life cycle. And there are few incentives for the adoption of innovative and more efficient technologies. Now, what benefits and how can life cycle costing contribute to a green economy transition, and generally, what are the benefits of a green economy transition? So supporting policy solutions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and protect the environment. They also allow for improved safety, sustainability, and reliability of energy systems. And of course, the digital aspect of e-procurement, or when using life cycle cost in e-procurement, allows you to monitor and also to achieve energy savings through smart application. Moreover, it has also, life cycle costing has also positive benefits on the financial sector. First of all, it allows contributing to building up of Paris Agreement and screening process for intermediate finance projects. It allows for lower cost of delivery and extended lifetime of power generation in the national market. Another benefit is reduced transaction cost, and in case of procurement between two states, cross-border digital payments. And it also contributes to emergence of wider and deeper digital markets that benefit both sides. On one hand, businesses, on the other hand, customers. And now I'd like to go on the legal background that has already been previously mentioned in several presentations of the GPA.
Natalia, I'm sorry, in the interest of time, I would like to kindly ask you just to give us some wrap up of the main points. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Dorina. Okay, so I'll try to be very brief. So I looked at the main procurement stages and how can the legal tools of the GPA be leveraged so as to achieve life cycle cost in procurement. So as it already has been mentioned, the GPA permits is the first GPA that actually specifically mentions that environmental aspects may be used in the technical specifications. Further, the selection criteria allow for the conditions for the authorities to set conditions that suppliers have relevant prior experience where essential to meet the requirements of the procurement. And this is important, and I will speak about it in the next slide. And as it has already also been mentioned, the evaluation criteria, it's specifically stated, may include environmental characteristics, along with other criteria that are also relevant for LCC, such as quality, technical merit, and also the terms of delivery. And finally, also authorities may monitor or may enforce better the application of LCC through contract performance conditions based on the GPA, since Article 12 stipulates that tender documentation provided to suppliers shall contain any other terms of conditions. And here, environmental aspects or eco-friendly aspects may be inserted. And now I try to make like a practical applicance of the previous conditions, legal conditions that I specified previously. So how would this work in practice? For example, the technical specifications that the GPA stipulates shall be set in terms, it's preferably to be set in terms of performance rather than design, may lay very detailed environmental aspects. Secondly, authorities, if it's relevant to the contract, because the GPA says us this, may set mandatory criteria for tenderers' technical and professional skills in environmental management system. And of course, the award criteria should be based not on the lowest price dictatorship method, but on the economically most advantageous tender. And when speaking about contract performance conditions, the contractual clauses may indicate or should indicate compliance with the efficiency class in the field of eco-labeling. So there are ISO specific standards that may be inserted in the contract performance clauses, which will allow an enhanced monitoring with LCC. And also authorities may ask entities for compliance reporting with the conditions set and specifications at the beginning of the procurement. And I will be here very briefly. So for example, when specifications mention environmental characteristics, all of this may be at the beginning stipulated. So all the aspects, the cost, the installation cost, I made the example with life-saving bulbs, electric bulbs that may seem more expensive at the beginning of the procurement process. They usually have a longer duration of their lifetime and are proved to be cheaper. So actually, life cycle costing, this is how it can contribute to achieving value for money. I will not go through all of them, but just these are the examples through which specifications may help looking at the life cycle cost aspects of an undertaking bought by the authorities. So for example, energy consumption, what are the operation costs, what are the replacement costs, or the control gear lifetime, and so on and so on. All these parameters would help save first of all, electricity spending, but also would help the authorities to achieve higher value for money.
Thank you so much, Natalia.
Thank you.
And now we will pass to the next presentation. Our next speaker is Valentina Bianchini. She is also from SAPIENS, and she will present us sorry, I think we have some. Yeah, she will present us the trade liberalization from the GPP perspective. So, Valentina, the floor is yours.
Yes, so in the interest of time, I know that I don't have much time, so I will not present the slides that I prepared for you today. But what I wanted to share with you are some of my research findings. I'm a PhD student in management at the University of Rome Tor Vergata, and basically I analyze how we can use sustainable procurement to foster sustainability in global supply chain, which is something that the WTO with the GPA 2012 can really help achieving. I do not have a law background, but my research findings says that normative pressure have a crucial role in driving organizational changes in public administrations. For instance, I did a study of 3 public authorities in the US. Of course, we know that the US is a country where sustainability is quite advanced and public procurement is quite advanced. So of course, I'm not saying this is the benchmark for all countries in the world, but I chose these 3 public authorities, of which 2 are utilities companies, and one is an airport, to study how normative pressure can really foster changes at organizational level. And what I found is that in utilities companies that are based in California, where you maybe know there's been a Senate bill promoting, for example, the climate net zero objectives and targets, and also as asked public utilities companies to implement plans to mitigate climate change risks. Well, in those companies is where actually the change has been higher than in others where this regulation was not present. So we can see how actually regulation at a state level could actually bring changes at the organizational level. And what changes did it bring? It actually, these utilities companies were putting themselves in the condition to aim for higher targets of net zero. While the law, for example, prescribed utilities companies to have achieved net zero by 2050, this company decided to achieve it by 2030 voluntarily. And why is that? It's because normative pressure, of course, created a level playing field for these boards and committees governing these utilities companies to say, yes, we want to invest in this, we want to set targets higher. But of course, normative pressure alone and stakeholders' pressure are not the only good forces here that help. Before, many questions were about training and capacity building. What these utilities companies did, for example, was actually to equip themselves with higher organizational competence. And when I say organizational competence, I mean that they appointed specific function like sustainability experts at the very senior level to actually deliver and plan a climate change risk mitigation plan and a strategy. And they align the organizational structure of the utilities companies to fulfill this objective and this plan. So what my research shows is that the normative pressure is very, very much important. And so the plurilateral agreement like the GPA 2012 can really actually have a cascading effect and a trickle-down effect in boosting public authorities, organizational competencies, and adaptation to climate change risk. But it needs to be paired by organizational competence, by investing in human resources and in training and in capacities. And in this way, actually, we can create a synergy between the low pressure, the normative pressure, and the organizational resources in order to achieve better resilience to climate change risks. So this is the key takeaway that I wanted to share with you. And I hope that we will have maybe further occasion to share my research findings. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Valentina. So now I'll open the floor for questions. So Majed, please, let's start with you.
Thank you very much for first inviting us for this presentations. And it's good to see our friends in EBRD after a long time, especially Elisa and their colleagues. What I wanted to really talk about, it's not a question, but it's more of a comment. And it is really coming from our experience at the World Bank. Maybe for those who don't know me, my name is Majid Al-Baya. I am the procurement manager for the Middle East and North Africa at the World Bank, and I am located in Cairo, Egypt. That's why I'm connecting with you early, Elisa. What I wanted to really talk about is when we talk about a green public procurement, I think it's important that we link it right away with life cycle costing. I'm glad that we had the session on life cycle costing after talking about the practical aspects in a green public procurement. But I would like to see it even talked about in the same session and has the link right away, because when we talk about green public procurement, sustainability, we need really to talk about value for money. And yes, there will be increase in the cost, but there might be a reduction in the total cost of ownership. And this is really becoming more and more an issue when we address a green public procurement, especially when you talk about third or developing countries where they have limited resources, and for example, they don't find something to eat, they don't find a shelter, and then someone like me coming and talking about a green public procurement and really paying more to address the environment when they do not have really food to eat. So it is really crucial to talk about the total total cost of ownership when we talk about the green public procurement and sustainability in general. The other point I really liked much from the previous presentation is really the focus on the practicality of addressing a green public procurement in actual transaction. This is an area where we are really lacking resources, lacking experience, and our client countries are really asking this a lot from us at the World Bank, how to do things when it comes to green public procurement. For example, now in Egypt, they wanted to procure e-buses. What are the criteria you wanted to put in? What are the elements you need to consider in addressing life cycle costing in the tender from a practical aspects. This requires know-how, and it is important that we have tools, manuals. Yes, the EU have some, but I think we need more on that. For example, in the transport sector, in the power sector, in civil works. These are really lagging behind, but we have lots of projects being procured in this sector, not like what we have now, elements regarding procurement of certain goods in the ITC. And the last point I wanted to stress on is really the capacity building. With all of this, what we are talking about, the green public procurement, if we do not really do much and more of capacity building, especially on the practical aspects of using or addressing green public procurement in transactions, I think we will remain in a challenging situation, and we collectively need to do that. For example, in this regard, we are planning to have a climate or smart public procurement conference in MENA around maybe November, and you are all invited to co-sponsor and be part of it. We are planning to do a training for all MENA region in Kuwait in October. We will be very happy to cooperate with you to address the practical aspects when it comes to public procurement. But I think collectively we need to do a lot on capacity building in this area, because without it, whatever we say in the books may not really reach our client. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Majid. Other questions or comments? So Dirk shared with us the link to common declaration. And on a general note, before if we will take other questions, if any, I would like to highlight that all the presentations will be shared with all the participants, both that are present here and the ones online. If no further questions at this stage, I would like to thank everyone for your great contribution and participation. Indeed, it's clear that although significant activities and progress to a certain extent has been reached, but still there is a long way to go until we will see green public procurement policies and strategies implemented at the large scale, and in particular in the majority of developing countries. So currently, for example, only at OECD level, we have about 60 something% of GPP implemented, but otherwise the majority of countries are still lagging behind. And indeed, practical tools, capacity building, like practical support to developing and emerging markets in particular, are of great importance. So looking forward to joint collaboration and activities of IFIs, of international organizations, and WTO in particular will help contribute and achieve greater results in this area. And I'm sure that we will have other opportunities and we'll meet on future occasions to see the progress and to comment on the progress and to see what is to be done next. Elisa, if you want to add something.
Thank you so much, Dorina. But I think that we have got to the point that the messages we wanted to convey today are well delivered. Thank you so much to you for making up to be our moderator, despite the airline incidents. And thank you so much to all the speakers who has kindly joined us in person in Geneva. I am so jealous. I promise to be there next time and join you in person, as well as to colleagues from International Trade Center, Antonella Salguero, who is kindly sharing her work between EBRD
Женеве. Спасибо.
and last but not least, Sapiens Network colleagues. And let me use these 5 minutes for advertising an even nicer online event, which is coming next week from Sapiens Network. Sapiens Network, which is 10 universities all over Europe. They will gather in the UK at the University of Birmingham, which is one of the partners in the network, to discuss latest research of their PhD scholars from all over the Europe and countries as far away as China. So I'm looking forward very much to Birmingham next week, 20th June, full day event, University of Birmingham. If you would Google Sapiens Network conference, it pops up immediately. And we will also share a link to online participation to any of you who didn't manage to register for online participation. So if you would like to join, drop a line to Eliza Arakalian, who is hosting our official online participation line for Sapiens Network conference next week, and we will share connection links to you so you can get more of the topics briefly mentioned today by Natalia and Valentina, as well as 10 other PhD scholars who are doing amazing work on how to get sustainable procurement a default practice in every government. So thank you so much for today. Let's join next week for Sapiens Network conference. And we are looking forward to our next GPA session, which is going to be at the next plenary. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day.
Bye.
See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.